Hello, gunfighters, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and gun-related stuff the right way with God at the center. Gonna try something a little bit different. You guys are probably familiar if you've listened for any length of time. The Better Know a Cartridge episodes. They're kind of short episodes on a pretty particular topic, so I think I'm gonna forego the lengthy bio. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Pretty succinct. You want to support? Go to Patreon. Should be a link in the show notes. Boom. Let's get into the day's cartridge. I also want to mention some of these do quite well on YouTube, the cartridge talks, but primarily these are meant to be podcasts, listened to on Spotify, iTunes. So if you're not listening to Gunfighter Life podcasts, you might want to check those out. If you don't listen to any podcasts, you may want to check those out on Spotify, iTunes. They're free. A really cool cartridge, the 9.3 by 62. Now those numbers may mean nothing to you. It's not a real common American cartridge. It's having a little bit of a resurgence, but in places in Europe and especially in Africa, and I'd say especially places in Africa settled by the Germans, colonized, however you want to put it, in those places it's very popular with a really good reputation. As much as we'd like to think so here in America, we do not have a monopoly on gun culture, on hunting. From what I understand, Germany has a rich hunting tradition, and especially the German settlers in Africa. 9.3 may not mean a lot to us here, but most Americans know 9mm and about what size that is. It's about 35 caliber, and therefore 9.3 must be a little bit bigger, and it is. It's .366. And most Americans are familiar with the term by 51, as in 7.62 NATO, 7.62 by 51. So if you extrapolate that to by 62, that should give you an idea of the case capacity. This round is a powerhouse. 36 caliber bullet with a 62mm case. That's pretty formidable. And it makes sense, right? If memory serves correct, right around the turn of the century, I want to say 1905, by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established, verify for yourself, but a German by the name of Otto wanted to make a capable African hunting round, because at the time they were colonizing Africa. He wanted to make a capable hunting round for taking African game in a bolt-action rifle, and I think he achieved that. Why a bolt-action? Well, because at the time, there was a lot of really high-end fancy double rifles and drillings. Beautiful, exquisite pieces. A lot of those even today. A lot of us have multiple guns are outside the reach of a common man, because they're crazy expensive. You have to do things like regulate the barrel when you have a double rifle. Think of a side-by-side shotgun. Less important with a shotgun because you're usually throwing shot. With a rifle, both those barrels have to be regulated to shoot precisely the same point of impact at, let's say, 50, 100 yards. Getting those barrels exactly aligned and fixing them in place is quite a process from what I understand, if you can think about that, especially with the tools and metallurgy of the time. So these double rifles, although exquisite and fine, and I would love to own one, just as they are today, are kind of outside the reach of most people. Most of us aren't going to spend $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. Even more on a fine double rifle. These Germans, these Boers, farmers. You went there, I would imagine, and the Boer wars and things like that are a fascinating time in history. I encourage you to look into those. But these were like the German pioneers, like we would think of the Americans that came to settle the West. I think of them like that, going to settle Africa. And they were not all super wealthy. Many of the men that came to settle in the U.S. were fleeing Europe for better opportunities, for freedom. And I think a lot of those same people, at different points in history, in this case of Germanic descent, went to Africa. And they needed a tool to take down lions, taking on their livestock, right? They needed things to put meat on the table. All the different really cool antelope species in Africa. They needed a capable, beefy round. At the time, not just in Germany, but around the world, the Mauser's kind of renowned for being an awesome bolt-action rifle. It still is. I think at the turn of the century, Otto looked at that and said, how can we shove a massive, powerful round into this bolt-action working man's tool that an average man can afford? He can safely protect and feed his family. I respect that. Well, he came up with this round, the 9.3 by 62, and I think he did an awesome job at that. Are there more powerful rounds? Yes, but a lot of times you need a much bigger, let's say less common rifle to fire them. This fits, from what I understand, in a standard kind of Mauser action, and it's much more powerful than what was common at the time, the 7x57 Mauser. A great cartridge in its own right, a great hunting cartridge, but it's not the same amount of power as a 9.3 by 62. I've been talking about power. Let's look at some numbers. I'm going to quote from a couple of different sources. I've been doing some research on this as this was a Patreon request, but I didn't feel I had enough knowledge to speak on it without doing some more research. Aside from the internet, I'll be quoting from the trusty Hornady reloading manual I often quote from, and some of this is going to come from Cartridges of the World, given to me by another patron. Iron sharpens iron, right? This community helping each other out. Them helping me out, me helping them out, and hopefully helping some of you out there out, and hopefully some of you want to become a part of the community. I'm very humbled and blessed to be a part of that. Anyway, let's look at some numbers. 286 grain. Sectional density, 0.305. Bullet diameter, 0.366. 286 grains. 23 to 2400 feet a second with a bunch of different powders. Even Varget, which is one of my favorite go-to powders. I love Varget. These are reloading data, if you don't know. I'm quoting from a reloading manual. I encourage you, if you're going to get into this, you might want to get into reloading just for this cartridge if you're planning on shooting it and practicing with it. I should mention that the Hornady reloading manual does also say that it gives great accuracy, this cartridge, which is something to be said for such a beefy and old cartridge. Going to Cartridges of the World, we got a 250 grain soft point at 2600. It lists that same 286 weight at 2500. And it lists a 232 grain factory load at 2624. One of the other numbers I should mention is it's got a chamber pressure of 56,000 psi. That's fairly low compared to a lot of modern cartridges. Remember, this came out at the turn of the century. Imagine in a Ruger number 1 or a modern metallurgy action, you could bump that pressure up safely if there is good load data for it. A lot of load manuals for something like a 45 long Colt will list hotter loadings for more modern firearms. I don't know if that's the case with a 9.3, but I don't think it's necessary. This thing has proven itself to be powerful enough to take any animal on the planet that we would commonly hunt. I should caveat that. I don't know that anybody's ever shot a blue whale with this thing, but I'm talking land animals, elephants, rhinos, lions. This thing has a reputation for putting those things in the dirt. So much so that a lot of African countries, from what I understand, have a minimum bullet diameter for those kind of game, but they make an exception because the 9.3 by 62 is so capable, they say this one's okay because it'll put those animals in the dirt. I don't think you have to bump up the power. If that's enough power to kill anything on the planet, don't worry about it. And looking at that, I don't think you're going to have this in an ultralight mountain rifle. It's going to be in a fairly substantially sized rifle. I think with those numbers, my experience in shooting different cartridges, and I've never shot this cartridge, it's having a resurgence, but it was fairly obscure for a long time. It still is fairly obscure. I don't think it would have a ton of recoil. You'd know it was there for sure. But I think with that pressure and those velocities, even with those big beefy bullets, I think it would be manageable. It'd probably be more like a push than a punch. But I don't think it needs to be more powerful than it is. I think if it's capable of killing pretty much any land mammal on the planet, it's a good cartridge. And I think it's a good choice if you want a Dragoon, if you want a big, beefy round. If you plan on going to Africa, obviously a good choice. It is well known. It is well renowned. I would say this and the 375 H&H or the 375 Ruger, which is a little bit more modern case design. But I think these two go neck and neck. Either one, you take your choice. If you're going to Europe, going to Africa, this cartridge is not going to be as obscure as it is here. It's a good, solid choice. If you just want something different, a big, again, Dragoon, a big, beefy, heavy rifle. The only place in America I could really see this being a viable choice. Now, you could shoot a white-tailed deer with it if you want. It'll certainly kill it. But Alaska. Maybe Montana, Wyoming, where they are having problems with grizzly bears there. But Alaska, where coastal brown bears are big, big animals and nasty. This would certainly be a capable cartridge on those. And yeah, it'd be fine for moose, although I think people overplay. Really think they do. I've been a professional hunter and guide. I've been on many a hunt by God's grace, not just for domestic animals, but quite a few exotic animals as well. Been on hunts for buffalo and elk and fallow deer, axis, many an elk hunt. And I think people really overplay how much you need to take those animals. I think this would be a fine cartridge in Alaska and Montana, Wyoming, where grizzlies are a problem. That's a different issue. But I think people really overplay how much you need to kill a moose or kill a elk with proper shot placement. I've never shot a moose, to be fair. But I've been on many an elk hunt. Killed every single one of my elk with a .243. I don't recommend that. Unless you really put in the diligence to practice and make yourself a good rifle shot and are disciplined enough to know when not to shoot. I limit myself with that cartridge elk hunting to very judicious shot placement. That being said, I think people really overplay how much energy it takes to kill a moose, to kill a large even-toed ungulate like that. That being said, the 9.3 will certainly do it. It would certainly put down anything. Again, moose, bison. It's certainly capable. Especially if you hand load. Because I got to imagine, just like the 375 H&H, you could load this down a little bit. It's still going to be a powerhouse of a round. It just might be in a really cool historical firearm that you want. Maybe you just have an affinity for German things. Maybe your family's German. I'm certainly not putting that down. My family hails from Italy. My last name, Melito. In fact, a big chunk of my family, my grandparents came here from the old country. She went back for a time. My mom came here when she was 5. So I'm very much in touch with my Italian roots. And I get that. I really like Italian firearms. If you really like German firearms. If you really want to hunt big game with some kind of German heritage. This round is capable of killing any beast that walks on the earth. Period. End of sentence. And I think that's a pretty good place to wrap up this. A capable cartridge with a really cool history. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoy this content, I think it's worth the knowledge that you got here is worth the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo. Patreon, link in the show notes. Try to keep these cartridge talks brief. I am humbled that you give me some of your time. I appreciate you. The tactical verse of the day. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Repentance. I think a lot of times in modern culture vernacular, we have a wrong view of what repentance means. It means to change your mind, change your actions, to turn away from the things that are bad and turn back to God. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Simple, powerful truth. With that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.